Welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Women in Data and Artificial Intelligence. My name's Melissa Drew. I am your host. This week's episode is sponsored by WILDA, Women Leaders in Data and Artificial Intelligence. Today's guest is Bhuva Shakti. Now, what's interesting is not only is she in a senior leadership role within Capgemini, finance, credit, compliance, and payment transformation, but she's also the Chief Sustainable Innovation Officer for Bhuva's Impact Global, which we will get into more today, and holds the role of Global Chief Ethics and Culture Officer with Women in AI. Welcome.
Hey, Melissa, thanks for connecting today. And like we have spoken earlier, I lead the Chief Ethics and Culture Office at Women in AI, which is a global nonprofit community. So we help diverse leaders in artificial intelligence and data science. And also, as a senior director at Capgemini Financial Services, I manage multinational teams, clients, especially in the investment banking, capital markets, risk management, regulatory compliance verticals. And prominently at Bhuva's Impact Global, I combine my 25 years of corporate executive experience with nonprofit C-suite experience. I partner exclusively with women-led startups. I help grow their social impact and revenue simultaneously. You know, they both don't go well many times together. I provide consulting and advisory services as their fractional C-suite executive. My specialties include digital transformation, climate innovation, economic inclusion, as well as ethical enterprise operations.
That's a lot. And I know you've got other things going on that we haven't even mentioned. But before we get into our conversation today, I was taking a look on LinkedIn. That's something everyone knows that I do at this point, as I check you out on LinkedIn. And what I found very interesting is, yes, you did go and get your computer science and architecture, software engineering, data design. That's the heart of the original education. But just within the last, just since 2019, you went back to school, MIT Sloan School of Management in AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, and IoT. Then a year later, you went back to school, London Business School, specifically focused on the European Brexit, financial markets.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, it looks like you were also going back and getting your MBA specifically in private equity and venture capital. I didn't even know that that was a physical degree. And then to top it all off, you still went back to school to continue with in parallel MBA in finance, sustainability, and entrepreneurship at Columbia University. I'm a really huge advocate, for some of the things that I do in parallel to this podcast, in advocating that we've got to have opportunities to skill up and,
Yes.
Upskill or skilling up or continuing the education. You are one of the individuals that you've taken that to heart and you've actually just full on went into it. And I want to talk to you about what prompted you to go back, and also these specific topics are very unique.
No, thanks for taking time to go through my profile. I'm constantly,
Sorry about that. Yeah.
no problem at all. So I'm constantly drawn towards, what's coming in the future, always looking into trends that are both in the industry as well as in the technology space, and also how people, processes, and things emerge, right? So I'm always looking at technologies and industries with a combination of how to ease human overhead. I'm not into trying to replace humans with technology, rather how they can collaborate together, especially to increase accuracy, speed, and scalability, and also to dynamically adjust to the ever-changing business ecosystem. So for that, I think your technology is really important, but also trying to bring humans in the loop, but also keeping up with what's evolving constantly. So I had a dual graduation in computer science and software engineering. I
Mhm.
went back to get executive business school certifications, both from Wharton and MIT, among many others that I don't want to go into today, but very relevant are in data analytics, artificial intelligence, blockchain, IoT, and cybersecurity.
Mhm.
I'm also a very big believer in, let's say, privacy, data trust, inclusion, in all things fintech. So it's not about just technology and finance, but how do we bring in all these social elements into the technology and the finance landscape. With that in mind, I went back to Columbia Business School about 5 years back. I wanted to specialize more in entrepreneurial leadership. So I have a long corporate career, but then how do we do investments, but in the sustainable space? How
Mhm.
do we connect with the vast global network of Columbia between private and public organizations, especially most of the world's decision makers, change makers also rely on some of the research and the work that comes out of universities like Columbia. And while there, I also ventured into some of the early stage startup investing.
Mhm.
I predominantly focus on social innovation startups, especially those that focus on bringing economic freedom to the unmarginalized, or sorry, let's say
Mhm.
underrepresented communities, as well as how do you reduce inequalities, right? So any startup that's focused in this space, I'd like to work with them or invest in them, whatever way I could be of help.
So when we think about what you do, you mentioned a lot working for a lot of the not-for-profits, the startups, not only as a pre-seed growth accelerator or an investor, but also board roles, mentoring. But if I look at that and compare to your education, was it the roles came first and then you went and got the education to backfill that expertise? Or did you feel that they were done in parallel? Or you thought, okay, I need the education first and then I'll go out and do that? And I asked that specifically because I get that question a lot, where a lot of women have pondered, do I get the education first and then try to go out and support these nonprofits or boards? Or do I go out and support them and then try to follow up with the expertise? Do you have a perspective?
Yes, yes, definitely. It's not education first, it's experience first, right? Whenever I've tried to explore a new area, let's say I have corporate finance experience, I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to explore sustainable startups within the finance and technology space, of course, but how do we go into very niche specialties? I didn't just go and first get education, rather, I tried working pro bono or volunteering with several nonprofits and other startups
Mm-hmm.
to see where the industry is headed and to see also in real time what they do on the ground on a day-to-day basis. Then I formed a kind of a vision where I know specific areas that interest me, and then I went back to school to specialize in those interest areas, not
Mm-hmm.
only to theoretically enhance the knowledge, but rather also to meet people in that space, meet experts, what are the latest trends, research, and where the industry or the technology is headed in future. So I would say if you are trying to explore a new space, first explore it at a nonprofit or a startup, pro bono,
Mm-hmm.
free, volunteering, whatever you want to call it. Then once you've established your interest, then go back and specialize in a specific area that you are interested in.
I like that perspective. Oftentimes people go to school and they get a degree in liberal arts because they're not quite sure what they want to focus on. And then you go out in the world, you find your passion and realize it's the complete opposite of what you went and got your education on. So
Yeah.
no, I really like, especially if you don't have that idea right away, or you still
Mhm.
want to explore. I like that. I like that. That's good. You are. We mentioned this. Bhuva's Impact Global,
Mhm.
Chief Sustainable Officer within that. But you mentioned earlier in the introduction that this is a combination of your own consulting background, your expertise, advising services, women led sustainable tech startups. I'd like to focus a little bit more into that area.
Sure.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so if you look at my professional journey
Mm-hmm.
within Capgemini, it's mostly working with corporate clients on Wall Street, right? So
Mhm.
I'm a transformation executive specifically focused on banking and capital markets. I lead and expand international client accounts, focused on, let's say, finance, technology, as well as management pillars. So I've run global portfolios across 4 continents,
Mm.
typically ranging upwards of $100 million in revenue. On a day-to-day basis, I partner with CEOs, CFOs, or CTOs. Earlier digital transformation initiatives these days, including cloud transformation as well. But I
Mhm.
also put a lot of emphasis on mergers and acquisitions because I see a lot of potential between global banks and their regional business units going through mergers and acquisitions to find ways to optimize and transform systems. And from there, I started venturing into the nonprofit space, especially because I was interested to learn more about how artificial intelligence can be applied to still same fintech, but also bringing in sustainability and also focused on women.
Mhm.
And that's where my role at Women in AI comes into picture, where as a ethics and culture officer globally, I lead a community across 160 plus countries, and this is fully a volunteering position. I'm always finding ways to inspire and nurture women and non-binary people. It's
Mhm.
for everyone who identify themselves as women and non-binary, and I support girls starting from schools, right? So where they are trying to learn about technology, and then students who are trying to pursue a career in artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, whatever it is, trying to specialize their technology skill, all the way through PhDs and researchers. Especially, I focus on applying technology for sustainable planet and people wellness, right? So, I work with a lot of private and public partners to bring in impact investments,
Mhm.
and then also work on bringing ethics and culture across industries. So within Women in AI, I focus on all industries beyond just finance to see how we can apply sustainable technologies. I do run a lot of free programs. Of course, I have a wonderful team. And all of this is at no cost to anyone who wants to participate, right? So we support them with hackathons, to help elevate their portfolio. We help them launch sustainable startups. We run incubator, accelerator, and fundraising programs,
Mhm.
but only focused on female founders who are in need of equal opportunities, because my goal is to eliminate exclusion, right? So how can
Mhm.
we provide equal opportunities to everyone to participate in the ecosystem? So this is where I say I bring my corporate experience as well as my nonprofit experience into my own consulting and advisory startup known as Bhuva's Impact Global. Uh, my mission here is to just grow social impact and revenue for women-led sustainable tech startups. So why do I say these two together is because many times when you are a sustainable startup, there are revenue
Mhm.
implications. But on the other hand, if you are focused high on revenue, then there could be social impact. Let's say decisions that may not be prioritized. So
Mhm.
my goal is to provide a specialized suite of fintech transformation consulting as well as fractional C-suite advisory services, plus also education, right? So
Mhm.
how can we educate some of these startups at any fundraising stage to bring in ethical operations, to bring in sustainable tech, but also be dynamic to the future trends. More importantly, also, we don't want to lose sight of ethics, governance, and the climate innovation aspects, right? So, within banking, fintech, climate tech, and inclusion, how
Mhm.
can we bring both the sustainable as well as revenue goals
Mhm.
accomplished for startups that are in need of such services?
I think that is a perfect segue to really the next section of this. If I focus a little bit more on what you just mentioned, the financial inclusion enabled by technology exclusively for women that you've mentioned, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. And I'd like to understand not just your perspective, but your vision. And I say that as 2 separate words. Perspective is how you see things, your lens, you see something slightly different than maybe I would see it. But when I talk about your vision, it's really, what do you see for the future? So, question one, how can we eliminate bias but integrate ethics into the financial services industry?
Sure. Yeah, this
Mhm,
is very close to my heart.
mhm,
My goal is to expand funding for small businesses and also level the playing field, right? So within the macro and the microeconomic systems. Especially after the pandemic, we see a lot of technical and digital transformation.
mhm,
AI is everywhere, chat GPT and so on and so forth. In the financial services sector, I see a lot of challenges and bias in the data sources, right? So a lot of decisions are based on data, and these days many of these algorithms use alternative data. So what do I mean by that? It may not be your direct demographic data. It could be also based on your social status, your home infrastructure, who are your contacts, so on and so forth. So to objectively apply data and make decisions, we need relevant ethics and governance controls in place. For example, um, women have historically encountered unconscious bias. They're excluded from the financial ecosystem. We know that there is approximately $17 billion in gender credit gap, which means women who are eligible to receive credit but are not being provided by their local banks or national institutions and so on, right? So they could be in, let's say, either they don't have digital access yet, or they have digital access, but they don't have the relevant financial access yet. For example, they could be denied credit by their local bank. They could be paying higher premiums on their insurance. They want to launch a business and they don't have resources
yep.
or the support in their local community bank or credit union or even a national bank, right, for that matter. And many times what we have understood is the data that's used has past historical bias, and that has also led to current algorithmic bias. And also going into more about identities and data, right? So for example, today many people in US and across the world do not have a legal digital identity, meaning they do have identity, but there are no unique legal digital identifiers. And if such data exists, there is always these implications around privacy, right?
Mhm,
Did I share the data? Did I consent to that data? Do I trust you to share my data? There are so many questions like that. And what happens when we do not take care of all these additional social and economic elements related to people when we are doing data decisions?
mhm.
Then that data is going to be biased, and decisions that are taken do not help everyone, especially women, to be included in the financial ecosystem. So my recommendation is it should be driven top down from the CEO and the CFO organization in any organization. It is not specifically fixing technology. Okay, build a technical product, roll it out in the market, and think it will work for everyone. Rather, it should be a culture and ethics decision from the CEO office. It should be inbuilt within their mission and values. So, for example, so different business units should be able to share data openly, right, to build AI trust as well as eliminate bias. And also, it should be able to reward someone
Mhm.
who's done unbiased cross-functional decisions, right? So data primarily, and also ensuring it's top down from the C-suite, not just a technical implementation, but rather a organization-wide ethics and culture implementation is critical.
So, you know, when we think about our 21st century skills, the skill sets that we need for our next generation. So, one of the things we talk about is literacy, and
Mhm,
you'll notice I didn't say the word data literacy. I said the word literacy.
mhm,
And nowadays, literacy is not reading and writing, it's technical literacy, it's financial literacy, it's data literacy, it's bias, it's literacy, it's everything that you've just talked about, but it encompasses that everybody in the organization needs to have that education, or not even to be as skilled or experienced as you, but at least to have that awareness and be able to ask the questions.
And ask the questions freely and openly without any, let's say, inhibitions, right? So that's how you can eliminate bias and grow as an organization or as a community.
If we take that one step further, yes, we talked about eliminating bias and how we integrate ethics into financial services. But in order to eliminate bias, the one level below that is data, specifically the quality of data, the data coverage. What do you think we need to do to ensure that we have that more balanced approach?
Yeah, definitely. So, especially within the financial services sector, there are a lot of things, and I come from the financial services sector as well, so I'm not trying to be biased or unbiased here. Rather, the fact on the ground is a lot of this data is used to making decisions on people's lives, whether or not they are in the financial services sector. For example, a credit card or a loan approval or an insurance decision or a micro loan for your small business, they all impact day-to-day lives. But then these are slowly becoming machine-based decisions, meaning not a human optimized decision, rather algorithms are making such decisions. So when the customer is given an approval or a rejection, especially a rejection, they should be made aware as to who made the decision, right? So is the machine making the decision? How did it arrive at that? And what are the factors that went into it? You can't just say, hey, you are not approved and leave it at that. And these days, we also see large organizations, even smaller financial institutions trying to say, hey, machine made the decision and call it that, right? But it's never okay to deny access to especially billions of women who have financial rights like men just because data made a decision and the human integration was not there. So I'm a big proponent of integrating humans into the decisions. Definitely technology is going to be helpful to make accurate, faster decisions, but humans should be in the loop, right? So it cannot be called as, oh yeah, sensitive data, finances sensitive, so we can't rely on exposing many of this because it's proprietary, all that, right? Because the customer has the right to know what got the rejection and did they even consent to the data that the bank has selected on them, right? So in fact, there is an example of a Wall Street bank a few years back where the husband and wife, they both applied for credit. They had same levels of income, same credit score, but the husband got 20 times more credit approved than the wife. All things equal, the only difference between them was the demographic factor, especially gender-based, right? And in this scenario, the bank was not penalized or proper compliance controls were not put in place because it's a machine-based decision, right? So what's more important, and I also focus a lot on ethics and compliance. So regulatory reporting is another channel where we can hold some of these institutions accountable. So we have to integrate all sources of data, be open about eliminating bias and implementing top-down and bottom-up approaches, plus also implement regulatory compliance controls, especially stress test your algorithms multiple times through data that has been captured both in pre-processing, in processing, as well as after processing, run it through a human integrated loop where we are able to identify and eliminate any gender, race, ethnicity based bias and keep iterating it to kind of, let's say, 2 or 3 times of a review between the machine and the human before you make a decision on someone's livelihood, right? So that's very critical, is my view.
I want to pivot just a bit around the equity or inclusion of technology, specifically from the government perspective. And the reason I ask that is I recently posted an article. I didn't write the article, but I posted the article. And one of the things that it mentioned was, here are 6 things we can do to help improve gender equity and in
Mhm.
help specifically around awareness and education. But the number one thing that was on there was governments need to improve affordability of digital resources. So I'm interested in, as we talk about um, focusing, the financial exclusivity, but we also mentioned enabling technology. I almost feel like we have to bring in the topic of the technical governance and the culture, but I'm interested also in how you see, does government even play a role in this? Should they be playing a role in all of this?
See, I think so. I think so because we are
Okay.
in such an early stage, and that's why it's really important for the government to also set up some of these compliance
Mm-hmm.
related conditions, right? So unless you are told, let's say in the US, for example, by SEC, that your data, your algorithm, or your
Mm-hmm.
organization should comply with X, Y, and Z, you will be penalized or you will have to pay fines or whatever that is. People typically don't try to go and do that because sometimes it impacts the bottom line, top line, and all those
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And they don't get incentivized to doing this beyond their regular business operations that they have to run on a daily basis to make profits and also, of course, help the economy and the community. So I think at least in the early stages, the government should intervene, but
Mm-hmm.
not as government. That's why I've been talking a lot about the public-private partnerships.
Right.
So it should be a partnership between the public and the private organizations with government oversight. But in many cases, this is not achievable unless a public policy is in place at the local or the state or the country level. So my answer is yes, at this early stages,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we'll hit a time where we don't need oversight and it becomes part of the culture and ethics of the governance in our organization. So this is not some afterthought, it's built into the basics of the business.
I recently, and I can't remember at the moment where the study came from, but I recently read a study online that said when we look at where women are in leadership roles, we've increased really well. You know, I mean, obviously we can always, do better, but we've done pretty well within, say, the VP and higher. We're seeing more women every year being pushed into those senior leadership roles and adding their voice and perspectives to the greater good. And we see a lot of women coming out of college, going into financial services, going into technology. But there's this big gap in the middle. and,
Mhm.
um, and
Yeah.
if we have this really big gap in the middle, then the challenge here is, as eventually over time, the women who are in the C-suite, eventually retire. Um, and retire means go out and do something else, not necessarily retire from your job and that's it, but eventually retire. Then we're missing that group of women who are in those middle tiers, and there's not enough women there to support all the women that are currently exiting. So my question here is, with your you know expertise in looking at exclusively around women and financial inclusion and the leadership roles, do you have any specific thoughts on this topic, and do you have any recommendations of where we could start, in the organization? What can we do to start changing that dynamics?
Yeah, no, no, definitely. Um, this is one of the focus areas that I work a lot
Mm-hmm.
within my corporate as well as nonprofit side of lives. In fact, I wrote about this also after
Oh,
looking at an extensive
perfect.
research. I think about a few months back, I don't recall
Mhm,
when, but there was an extensive study conducted over several years by Lenin and McKinsey. It talks about the, I think, state of women in corporate America, where women at mid-career and executive levels are breaking up with their companies, right? Especially
mhm,
this is more prominent with the pandemic, a lack of equal opportunities, of course, but flexibility at work, their mental and physical well-being, as well as inclusion and so on and so forth, right?
mhm,
But it doesn't mean that they are not ambitious as men. It's just harder to advance as we go higher.
mhm,
And is it worth it? Are some questions that are leading for them to step back to a better life as they think that works for them as well as their families and friends, right? Um, in fact, as you go into the C-suite, there is only 1 in 20 the women, especially women of color, who get promoted every year. And
oh,
this is a stark difference between what happens with men, where at least 100 of them get promoted every year, right? So that's a very big gap. And also many times, there is microaggression and also reverse discrimination, things like that, not only for women of color, but also, let's say,
mhm,
non-binary people, disabilities, so on and so forth. So the list goes on and on. So the goal is how can an organization make the employees feel good for
mhm,
themselves, right? So how do you improve your DI strategy? Especially, I think this starts from the middle management, right? So they middle managers are the ones who play a critical role in upbringing diverse workforce. So they talk to them, they work with them on a daily basis, they gather feedback from them on each of their works 360-degree. And I think most of this heavy lifting
mhm,
should be fostered by the middle management, the managers who are in between C-suite as well as the starting career
mhm,
path. So the goal should be to provide equal access to everyone and everything. That should be like the basic corporate policy
mm,
instead of trying to do anything differently. But on the contrary, why many of these managers might not do some of this is because this is an additional KPI than their regular business KPIs that they have to
mhm,
perform on, right? So there is no additional incentive to
yeah,
provide mentorship. There is no additional incentive to do people management. There's no additional incentive to make you feel good to implement DE activities. Those are kind of additional activities and on top of focusing on sales and profit numbers. So
mhm,
obviously it's not directly connected to your KPI. So it's always an afterthought, right? So research also indicates that when your managers are interested in your work-life
mhm,
balance, the employees, especially diverse candidates, are willing to stay and perform more and are able to rise up to the middle and the executive management career. So I think providing some kind of psychological safety to managers, training them, rewarding them for KPIs achieved, like a sales or a profit
mhm,
revenue number, is going to be a very big step in improving the workforce to be diverse from the middle management to the upper management. And I think if it's part of the company culture, it's going to be into each and every layer of the organization, trying to help promote this as a primary KPI, not as a secondary volunteering KPI, right?
yeah.
So that's what I think. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. I'm having similar conversations. Just recently, I was at a conference and someone asked, "Culture, wow, that just sounds like a warm and fuzzy. You know, how do I change the culture of my company?" It just didn't
Mhm.
sound as easy as, okay, well, with change management, you do A, B, C, and D. And then also your comment about incentivization, KPIs,
Mhm.
our our KPIs, no matter where they are, within the organization, some of those KPIs are 30 years old. And it
Yes.
worked great back in the 70s. But we're in a completely different economy, much more global economy. With COVID, it allowed, I think, more connectivity globally because we really focused on virtual employees. I know my team has been much more virtual and much more global than it was 3 years ago. So no, I'm completely wholeheartedly in agreement with the concepts and the steps that you've outlined. Um, yeah, I was, as you were talking, and I'm going to ask because everybody on the internet is talking about generative AI. And I'm going to focus it specifically not on visual, like with art, but more textual. So, for example, everyone will be familiar with ChatGPT. But if
Yes.
we look at something like that and say, gosh, is this going to help us or is this going to be a hindrance as we look at our financial areas that we're talking about today? Two examples that I want to throw out there that have come up. One is, something like a chat GPT can be used in the financial forecast. It can train using the historical data, predict future trends, really focus on identifying patterns because that AI technology can do it much more quickly and with a higher level of confidence more consistently than, say, the human. But, we also think about it, on the customer side. I'm a customer and I'm really looking for some type of financial or financial product or financial service. I could use something like this, generative textual AI to really look at my spending habits, my preferences, what's my financial situation, and focus on a product or service that's going to be the right size or the best fit for me. But I don't have the financial background that you have. I'm very interested in hearing your perspectives on this.
No, definitely. So, like I said earlier, right?
Mhm.
So any technology could be a plus or a minus, but
Yes.
then I always want to see how can we bridge those gaps so it is a positive but also has a human element to it. So
Mhm.
very, very important topic. At least, yeah, recently I've been also trying to see how we can, let's say, not say it's either positive or negative, rather talk about more around responsible use of generative AI technology,
Mhm.
right? So that's where I am doing a lot of stress testing on the business use cases, especially in banking and payments, but also the socioeconomic implications, right, with respect to financial inclusion and ethics. So how does it all work together apart from speed and accuracy, right?
Mhm.
So I was recently looking at and I come from the credit risk and compliance background, and with startups in play, I also talk a lot about the microfinancing aspect of it, right?
Mhm.
So many small business owners, let's say, may or may not have a FICO score or a credit score, sometimes only because they may not have a digitized financial or a credit record,
Mhm.
but they may have a successful small business, whatever the size may be in their local community, right? And because we don't have that right data that can feed into an algorithm, we are excluding those customers who deserve microfinancing for their small business from the ecosystem, right? So my thought is we can use generative AI to expand financial inclusion, especially like you mentioned, you can do trends, forecasts, analytics, and insights. Why not use that on large set of current customer data, do some modeling, and predict creditworthiness of a similar or a future customer, right? And match that to a micro entrepreneur or someone who wants to build a small local business and provide them with financial opportunities. So, not eliminate someone from the ecosystem because they don't have relevant digitized data, rather,
Mhm.
use analytics and insights to model the current data to predict the creditworthiness of a future customer. So I think in that sense, generative AI and it has done already, can really parse through a lot of raw data sets. It enables fintechs to refine loan applications, right?
Mhm.
No longer, like you said, the whole ecosystem has changed now, especially what's true 5 years back is not true anymore. Forget 30 years or 40 years. So there are new types of loan applications coming into play. So if you don't have the direct data that we have been traditionally using for 50, 60 years, then why not use some alternate evaluation criteria? Do some faster credit decisioning based on modeling a future profile based on past data. All of this large data processing can be done by generative AI with speed and accuracy. And I think that's where it can really be helpful. So this also, not only helps the customer, but also the banking institution, right? So it reduces their risk exposure as well. So it's a win-win for customers to be included into the economy and for the companies also to reduce their risk exposure. But, on the flip side, as we have spoken a lot in this conversation already, there's always a possibility of unconscious bias from historic data sets, right? So that could still try to eliminate data, however much analytics or insight you try to bring in based on the usual certain demographic characters. So I think definitely human integrated generative AI decisions are critical. And like I earlier mentioned, we should build a tighter ethical AI governance around these, especially the new types of AI powered synthetic data generators, right? So they are not real data trying to generate synthetic data, but how do we eliminate bias and not actually resemble historic data, which has some unconscious bias? So I think there is a lot of progress that can be made, and some of the challenges can be overcome for both the customer and the business and for the society as a whole.
Well, Bhuva, you're certainly a wealth of knowledge. And I think in a different scenario, we'd probably be talking half the day. um,
Yeah.
as we wrap up, I was thinking of a scenario that I wanted to give you. And then as we wrap up, I'd like to get your kind of takeaways or thoughts. Specifically, as we mentioned earlier, you're focused around um, startups, women-owned startups, women startups using artificial intelligence technologies. And given everything that we've talked about today, what are some of the just one or two things that they can start doing after listening to this podcast to really change their, as we mentioned earlier, the financial equity?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I'd say maybe just two things,
Mhm.
right? And none of these are long term. You have to spend a year or two to try to have a change. Number one is try to refine top down your mission, vision, and values of the organization and build in ethics, governance, and openness and being transparent about biases in data
Mhm.
to be surfaced as soon as possible so we can find solutions. So the goal is to bring in such transparency and ethics and diversity built into your organization top down.
Mhm.
So we surface the problems first and then find solutions. So that's a top down approach you can do like the tomorrow morning,
Mhm.
right? You have the C-suite call in a board meeting and come up with top 3 things your company will focus in the next quarter and try to create awareness, educate your organization, and then come up with simple steps to first identify problems and then start solutioning. So that's something you can do easily today. The second thing I will definitely say is data, definitely, right? Because when you are labeling someone as a sustainable startup, it could mean thousand things. But how do you validate yourselves and differentiate yourselves uniquely in front of an investment community or a customer community? That's by bringing in metrics and data. Bring in quantitative ESG metrics or sustainable data along with the revenue data, the profit data that you always showcase. So that will always give you a balance of your social impact and revenue focus. It need not be one or the other. So start bringing in quantitative ESG metrics into your revenue, profit, and other financial metrics that you do. It could be even just one matrix, one quarter. This quarter, identify one metric, add to your forecast, and then try to keep improving that. So that will actually give you validation as a sustainable startup, not qualitatively, but rather data with revenue on paper that everyone can see as a fact.
I think those are very, I'm sure there's more. We said we'd keep it at 2, but I think those are things that even myself, I could take away from this. I appreciate, Bhuva, your time today. I know that you and I carved this out to fit around our weekend schedules.
Yeah, no,
So
thanks,
thank you so much
Melissa.
for your time. Thank you. And if anybody is interested, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat about either whatever topics we spoke today or anything new, because I'm always looking for the future innovation.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again, Bhuva.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa.
Mhm.
Thanks for your time.